You're a loser, Skeletor.
You'll see who the loser is.
The Masters of the Universe should be one of the easiest franchises to turn into a movie, and yet it's been stuck in development hell for years. Scripts were rewritten, directors replaced, release dates announced, then scrapped. Why is it so hard to get a proper adaptation? Well, a major contributing factor is the simple fact that the franchise is stuck in a cycle of failed reboots. Every few years, a new version, a new team, new direction, same result. A moderately successful thing that is canceled before it can truly prove its worth. For a franchise that's been around for close to 50 years, why is it so hard to get it right? And why is the best version one that almost no one remembers?
I'm dying. Save me, Hordak, so I can continue my conquest of Eternia.
Unlike many would-be decades-long franchises, Masters of the Universe has a key problem at the core of its fan base. They want the world to be what it was when they were kids. Most franchises struggle with some version of a push and pull between different competing factions of fans who want the franchise to pursue different agendas. But one of the most extreme versions of this phenomenon manifests in the He-Man fandom. There are multiple versions of the character, and a core concept that was meant to be focused on was reinvention. But because of the gargantuan success of the original show and a fan base that has a weapons-grade addiction to nostalgia, Mattel has struggled to make any version past the initially popular incarnation of a worldwide success. Is this issue something that's fundamentally broken with the high concept of the franchise, or is it just Mattel picking the wrong people to spearhead new and, theoretically, rejuvenated versions of the characters everyone loves? Well, to understand this problem more thoroughly, we have to return to the source. Originally inspired by a prospective Conan the Barbarian licensing project, the future billion-dollar franchise had distinctly humble beginnings. And when I say humble, I mean creator Roger Sweet literally produced custom prototypes by gluing pieces of plastic to discarded Big Jim action figures. A true visionary. Legend has it that the original idea for the line would have featured a reboot every season, jumping from genre to genre. The initial 3 toys presented were a barbarian, a real-world soldier, and a guy with a tank turret for a head. Tragically, they didn't pick him to front his fledgling toy line. He-Tank and the Masters of the Universe apparently didn't have as much of a ring to it. The figures were met with enthusiastic reception from Mattel brass. However, the idea of rebooting every season to chase toy industry trends seemed a bit too risky. Therefore, the decision was made to start with the barbarian theme and see how it was received by the market. When they hit shelves in the spring of 1982, these toys were an instant success, owed in large part to the fact that Mattel had partnered with Filmation to produce an animated television program to help spread the word about the muscle-bound toys. You see, prior to the 80s, there were very specific requirements about what could and could not be marketed toward children as entertainment. However, after some legal restructuring during the Reagan administration, children's television would never be the same. And here's where we get into the fatal flaw of the toy line. Roger Sweet might have had a great visual idea for a series of toys, but a story? One that could support an animated show and an ever-expanding universe? Well, that's a whole other story, if you will. Originally, Mattel hired Donald F. Glute to write a series of mini-comics to include in the packaging of the toys. Now, they didn't exactly set the world on fire, but the world and characters are technically there. They're all just kind of half-baked and end up in a generic barbarian and his nemesis struggling for control of the world-style narrative. We've seen this sort of thing a million times already. Originally, there was no central editorial department keeping everything consistent. No one expected the toy line to blow up the way it did, and Mattel was just checking the box of some kind of generic action hero story. However, as the toys really started to be accepted by kids across the country, things took on a life of their own. You see, He-Man and the Masters of the Universe's cultural ubiquity reached its apex in the late 1980s, when after multiple seasons of the Filmation show and its spin-off She-Ra and the Princess of Power, the gold ring of franchise development happened. A live-action movie went into production. It's hard to overstate just how popular He-Man was. The toys were everywhere, and the show was both loved and hated in equal measure. Proponents and fans thought it was a rousing, fantastical adventure show that children of all ages could enjoy. Detractors thought it was 22-minute commercials, poorly made, and produced exclusively to sell toys to the underdeveloped minds of grade schoolers. This hype and financial success eventually convinced Canon Films to produce a modestly budgeted film based on the franchise. And here's where we get our first major misstep, one in an endless cycle of hype and disappointment. At the time, the Masters of the Universe film just wasn't what anyone wanted. did. Granted, the movie had some tangible flaws and mostly saw He-Man, Teela, and Man-at-Arms traveling to Earth in search of a MacGuffin that is as forgettable as it is stale. It's almost like there just wasn't enough money to make this movie in the canon coffers, and the people involved just weren't interested in trying to get the admittedly confusing tone of 75% Conan, 25% Star Wars right. But the true cardinal sin of the movie is that it simply arrived too late. He-Man fever had already largely subsided by 1987, and the poor timing and lack of fidelity to the source material caused it to underperform at the box office. What was supposed to be the biggest success Mattel had experienced yet was their most crushing defeat. This disappointment more or less spelled the end of the once popular franchise. And as we all know, once brand oversaturation is achieved, it's pretty hard to walk that back. But after only a few years away from the spotlight, Mattel attempted to mount a comeback with an ill-fated science fiction-based reboot titled The New Adventures of He-Man. And as you could have guessed, it failed even harder than the movie. It was over. He-Man was officially a has-been. No franchise had been soft rebooted, failed, and made it back to the upper echelons of cultural ubiquity. However, there was something lurking in the wings no one could anticipate: nostalgia. Confusingly titled He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, this new show was put out by Cartoon Network and took a more mature and stylized lens on the classic iteration of the franchise. Or at least that's what it was marketing itself as. Based on the newly updated toy designs by the fan-favorite design team, the Four Horsemen, the show premiered on Toonami in August of 2002. In many ways, this is exactly what the fans had been asking for. The writing was more mature, the violence more intense, and the characters evolved past their jokey one-note presentation from the previous incarnations. Mattel and Cartoon Network knew exactly what they had on their hands: a unique version of a franchise that had pretty much done the impossible, resurrected a beloved children's property from decades past, and made it relevant again. The toys were selling, the fans were happy, which only meant one thing: it was time to try and push things even further.
Step aside, boys. A change is at hand.
It's important to remember that He-Man was all but considered dead at this point. The new show had a simple objective: to develop and evolve the property past what anyone could expect it to become. If it failed, there might never be another He-Man property again. This show needed to create storylines that recontextualized classic 80s characters like Skeletor, He-Man, and, well, there's a lot of other fun characters, but let's be real, as far as the outside world was concerned, those two characters were the whole franchise. The new show's very existence seemed to be screaming, no, there's real potential here, let us try and develop it. Case in point, episode 35, which aired on December 13th, 2003, titled The Power of Grayskull. This episode is looked back upon as not only the best episode of this series, but probably the best episode of any Masters of the Universe project ever made. Why is that, you ask? Well, the He-Man franchise as a whole has never been widely recognized for its depth or character development. It's a show exploring a very specific concept: power. It's a power fantasy on an almost cartoonishly literal level. And this episode attempts to interrogate those ideas on a deeper level, both thematically and from a continuity perspective. Written by Dean Stefan and directed by Gary Harley, the episode serves as the origin story for He-Man's distant ancestor, King Grayskull. The story in question also serves as a skeleton key for the universe as a whole. See, the 2000s were a different time. Most kids' animated programs from this era didn't focus on political machinations, complex power dynamics, or dense story lore, but this episode has all three of these ideas in equal share. In the episode, we see Prince Adam's distant ancestor, King Grayskull, preparing for a battle against one of the two warring clans of enemies, the Snake Men and the Horde. They're currently embroiled in their own war, and whoever comes out on top will end up competing against Grayskull and his comrades for control of Eternia. Seeking a means by which to fight these enemies, Grayskull goes in search of the Great Power, a mystical power source that might be his only chance at becoming powerful enough to stop whichever of his enemies prevails. In case you didn't put it together, this is a flashback episode, not just a flashback sequence in another episode, which makes it feel more mature and exciting. Now, aside from some kick-ass action sequences and an actual explanation for where the Great Power comes from, it also showcases the central villain from the She-Ra Princess of Power show, Hordak, in all his glory. This might seem like a fairly obvious observation, but in 2002, when franchise building and cameos weren't what they are today, the idea of having a flashback episode of Hordak duking it out with guys and being way more badass than he had any right to be, it was pretty impressive. The way they showcase him in the structure of the the episode is nothing short of fantastic. The main thrust of the season is He-Man fighting King Hiss and the Snake Men, so when it's revealed that Hordak not only defeated Grayskull but the Snake Men in the past, it immediately builds him up as an even more impressive threat. The way Stefan and Harley handle Hordak tells you everything you need to know about the show. They make him physically imposing, a masterful sorcerer, and they build the narrative around him to play up the fact that he's genuinely an unbeatable foe. To make things even more compelling, after Grayskull sacrifices himself to push Hordak and his army into a portal, we don't see him again until the final episode of the season. He's featured in a cliffhanger that was going to set up a season 3 that would have featured Hordak mind-controlling Skeletor and taking over Eternia. But tragically, the show was cancelled after 2 seasons. In spite of its runtime being cut short, this incarnation of the show is looked back upon by fans of the franchise as a high point. Not only did it evolve the characters, but it also took the world of Masters and pushed it to places previously unseen. This one episode makes the season-ending cliffhanger all the more frustrating because it's a constant reminder of what could have been. Ultimately, this incarnation went off the air thanks to the defining factor in most of the Masters of the Universe adaptations: toy sales. The Snake Men figures just simply didn't sell as well as the initial wave did, which is a huge bummer because they looked great. The 2002 series was the 4th version of the Masters of the Universe franchise, and there have now been 4 subsequent iterations. Why is it so complicated to get these adaptations right? What makes this franchise so difficult to land on a mainstream level? Masters of the Universe doesn't keep failing because it's a bad idea. It keeps failing because no one can agree on what it is. And when it does work, why is it so hard to convince people to care? One of the primary aspects of the franchise that's difficult to land is the fact that the fanbase wants serious sword and sorcery style storytelling, but the world and characters are objectively kind of goofy, largely because they started out as toys, many of which recycle the same body parts. This led the original show to lean into the more comedic pieces of the universe, and the 2002 show to try and overcompensate by building out a more Lord of the Rings adjacent tone, granted with like a fraction of the budget. The N.D. Stevenson show She-Ra and the Princesses of Power splits the difference and is a wonderful and completely unique version because it's serious and humorous in equal measure. The most recent effort Mattel made into making He-Man happen was the dual-pronged Revelations and Revolutions shows and the youth-oriented and once again confusingly titled He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Both shows were met with fairly lukewarm reactions. However, what's interesting to me about them is the fact that they produced an adult animation and a children's animation at the same time. Mattel can tend to be pretty conservative about their approach to these things, and what sounds like a swing at doing something original is actually them attempting to appease an older fan base that's very vocal online. Even when they're trying to avoid this negative pattern they're in, they play right into it. There was a lot of blowback from a certain section of Masters fans when She-Ra was greenlit, and they made the creator's life a living hell for a few years there, so in order to minimize that, Mattel opted to attempt to court those fans by giving them the more mature show, while also making a CG show aimed at introducing a new generation of fans to the characters. Did either of these work all that well? Not really. Only time will tell how the new live-action film will be accepted by fans. It looks to be drawing much more heavily from the Filmation show than the subsequent incarnations. There's some tangible downsides to that, and a few obvious upsides. The tone also appears to be something closer to the 2002 show, which could enable the best of both worlds approach. We'll have to tune in and find out. The only thing that is for certain about the story at hand is that regardless which incarnation of Masters is your favorite, there's gonna be another one produced in the coming years. The only question is, will it be more of the same, or will it try and bring something new to the table? And well, that's all we have for this episode. What do you think? Why is it so hard to get He-Man right? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, please like, comment, and subscribe for more videos just like this.